Morning, everybody. All right, so I'm going to let you know up front that I'm going to definitely need your energy to help me this morning, to help all of us. I've been sick since last Monday, fighting a really bad cold, and if this was 2 days ago, I don't know if I would have made it here. I am the one who does this for my business and didn't want to leave you all, so been taking a lot of hot tea and chicken noodle soup and all that good stuff that they have out there, and lots of sleep trying to get myself here with you all today. I'm super excited to be with all of you. I don't know if all of that excitement is going to show in my energy today, so I want to let you know that up front. I am super excited to be here, and especially for this particular topic. This is one that's really close to home for me. It's close to my heart. It's one of the things that I've been doing since the very beginning of my professional career. As a matter of fact, when I moved out to St. Louis, Missouri in 1997 to move near my family, I moved here to start my own business. I was doing training and development and more traditional HR for a bit to get the experience. But I moved out here to start my own company to do sexual harassment prevention training. I really saw what was going on out there, and there was nobody that was doing this kind of training out there. So that has morphed. Sexual harassment prevention training is not the only thing that I do. As a matter of fact, I do a lot more than that, and I always recommend we do a lot more than just that. Interestingly enough, think about where we are in our times right now. So doing some research, prepping for this, and here's the article that I thought we'd start off with. Gonna just quickly scroll through this. By the way, not speaking one side of the aisle or the other. Do I agree with this? Not agree? Everything's allegations. You might hear some politicians mentioned. By the way, anybody hear about right now with Frankel, right, and more, right? I mean, ripe issues going on. So here's this headline on CNN. It says, the incomplete list of powerful men accused of sexual harassment after Harvey Weinstein. And the list, I mean, it's just amazing how it goes on. Harvey Weinstein, Kevin Spacey, anybody watch House of Cards? Oh, used to, right? Well, I know they switched over the actor, so they took him out. James Toback, I don't even know all of these people. Ben Affleck, we know him. We know this gentleman, George H.W. Bush. Have you seen this? Accused. We've got Trump accused. I'm not even going to continue reading this. Just wanted to kind of get my brain and us really in the right path that this is taking place all around us. There are men coming out in the public eye right now, right? Prominent figures accusing other men of sexual harassment. There are women coming out accusing other women now of sexual harassment, right? And these are not I would imagine, most of our day-to-day workplaces, right? But my next article that I saw as I was doing my research saying the EEOC, or at least people are concerned that the EEOC is not going to be able to handle the deluge of additional claims just specifically for sexual harassment. I think we're going to see a jump in other claims as well, just because people are now believing, at least this is what the going thought is that people are starting to feel more and more comfortable coming forward with claims. So, I thought I'd start out with the idea of sexual harassment for this reason. One, it's right now, it's all over mass media, right? I mean, and this is what other countries are seeing, is a big issue that we're grappling with that's been around for decades. Again, which is why I'm super excited to be here, because I think that I've always thought we've gone about this subject all wrong, right, as a society. And now the EEOC has really caught up with that idea. Lots of organizations have. So I'm here to share really what it is that they're looking for from us. So this is not what I'm looking for from all of you or attorneys are looking for. This is what the EEOC is looking for, those that determine whether they're going to take a case or not take a case on behalf of an individual or a class, right? Or kick it out then to the attorneys of the world and the plaintiffs' counsel who are hungry, right, for a really good case, especially to, get a class going after a particular organization. So I start out with sexual harassment just to really make this point, is that since 1986, right, and those of you that have been in HR for years to know this, Meritor v. Vincent let us know that sexual harassment, not discrimination, but sexual harassment was illegal under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So 1986, I don't know how many years later, right, I don't think we're any further, and I know that we're not any further when we see the percentage of claims that are out there. Just want to make sure that I'm in check with the presentation. So I brought with you the 2016 statistics, right? So what are the kinds of complaints out there? What are the percentage complaints out there? And one of the reasons that I love for you all to see this is to see one thing. I still get phone calls all the time. Can you come in and do sexual harassment prevention training? Absolutely. Would love to talk to you about that. But that's not the only issue. And as a matter of fact, when I hear that, that's kind of an indication to me that you may not, if that's a piece of what you're doing, right, a part of a more holistic approach, and that's one piece, that's great. But if that's all that you're doing and all that you're planning on doing and all that you've done, that lets me know that you're not really caught up with everything that's taking place out there, right? So if you look at the percentage of charges, so this is the 2016 charge filings with the EEOC. They received over 91,000 charges of discrimination or harassment and or retaliation. As a matter of fact, for years now, retaliation has been the #1 charge filing with the EEOC, right? For those of us that are new, don't want to actually make any assumptions, EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, that's the federal agency that's charged with taking in complaints of harassment, discrimination, and retaliation based on race, color, religion, age, sex, national origin, disability, pregnancy, marital status, affiliation status, genetic information, equal pay. I think I got everything. Did I miss anything? I think I got the list, right? So it's important for you all to know that retaliation is the #1 charge continuously out there. What does that mean? That means that individuals are not bringing the underlying claim, or they're trying and losing that they were harassed or that they were discriminated against. That's getting thrown out, going nowhere. But the individuals are saying, okay, so I might not have actually been harassed, but when I brought forward that complaint in good faith, you didn't handle it right. I mean, that's the easiest way to put it. You did nothing, you overreacted, you fired me, the complaining party, you moved me to another location, right? I have a situation right now where they haven't, you know, I'm being brought in, and from what I understand, there's been complaints filed for about 2 years before the organization went to legal counsel. Why did they go to legal counsel? Because now they have a letter from the Missouri Commission, right, where this individual has now filed a complaint with that external agency. So for those of you that are taking notes, I don't have the actual numbers up there. So out of the 91,503 charges filed in 2016, 45.9% were for retaliation. 35.3% were race. So sexual harassment and sex discrimination charges, not our #1, not our #2. And as a matter of fact, we've got disability discrimination complaints. Top the charts, 30.7%. Sex, 29.4% of the total charges. Age, 22.8. National origin, 10.8. Religion, 4.2. Color, 3.4. And genetic information, one of our newest laws. We still don't see really a lot of play out there. And as a matter of fact, only 0.3% of the charges filed have to do with someone believing that they've been discriminated against because of something in their DNA. I think maybe there's 200, 300 charges filed of that. I think that's one that has not yet actually had its time come. I think that's one that we still need to kind of pay attention to. So let me take a look at this another way with you. Do I have any state, local government, federal government employers here? Right, so you know how things break down is different, by the way, interestingly enough, based on the private sector and the federal sector charges. So again, I didn't give you the actual numbers, but you can actually see just by the colors and the breakdowns that race is an issue in both markets. But I will tell you, in the federal sector, race does top. 36% of the charges of harassment, so specifically the harassment charges filed. So what does that mean? So about 28,000 of the charges, of those 91,000 charges filed, included a harassment component. That's a big deal. So the EEOC is all over this. This is again why we're here, because they realize that at least a third of the charges filed with them have a harassment component, not just discrimination, right? Where somebody that has an adverse action taken against them. It's the environment that people have to live and work in, right? That's typically when we're dealing with claims based on harassment. So in the federal sector, in the order, race is #1, then disability, age, national origin, and then sex. In the private sector, it goes something like this. We've got sex as the #1 charge, then we've got race, disability, and then age in that order, and then small percentages of the national origin and religion at the bottom there, right? So, sex is a huge issue. One, race is a big issue in both. How about this from what you really see to me? This is what I would see. Race, sex, disability, retaliation. I mean, those are the hot topics right now that our attorneys are really looking to take these cases. How do I know? I sit in on lots of seminars with the defense bar, sit in on lots of seminars with the plaintiff's bar. I don't practice law. I try and keep us all out of trouble. I do a lot of investigations, lots of training, lots of coaching. I'm brought in by the attorneys to try and help an organization after they've gotten themselves into trouble. And these attorneys are looking for cases. They're not as excited right now, by the way, here in Missouri. Are you all paying attention to what's going on in Missouri? Right? So just quickly bring you up to speed. Things are changing in harassment discrimination here. I'm going to make a quick sideline, right? And so Missouri now has made it more difficult. That's probably the easiest way to kind of bottom line. It made it more difficult for individuals to get their day in court for harassment or discrimination. They need to prove motivating factor, right? Their protected class status, not just a contributing factor, right? So that's important. So attorneys, I used to talk to them and they'd say they don't even want a federal case. They only want it in Missouri. Now, if they've got a good case, they'll take it wherever they can get it, in federal court or in state court. So why are we here? We're not actually here, interestingly enough, and I'm going to go backwards, and I know some of you don't necessarily like going backwards, and I'll reference temperament right now because I know everybody processes things a bit differently, so I'll throw that out there and I apologize. But I wanted to quickly to go back for this. We're not actually necessarily here today because of the 2016 statistics by the EEOC. We're here because of the 2015 statistics by the EEOC, right? EEOC took a look at their statistics in 2015. There were about just under 90,000 charges filed of harassment discrimination. About 30% of those charges filed were for harassment. The EEOC said, wow, something's not going, we're not doing something right. We need to take a look at this, right? I started with 2016 because, right, things have really gotten worse. There's over 2,000 more charges filed in 2016. So I didn't even worry us necessarily with the 2015 statistics, right, because I wanted to stay more current. But suffice it to say, let me go in a little too far. Suffice it to say, we're here because the EEOC spent well over a year with experts from all different industries, right, representing individuals, representing employers from the private sector, industrial organizational psychologists, attorneys, you know, HR professionals, and they did a huge task force, really taking a look at this issue of harassment and discrimination. Is what's going on? What are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? Why aren't people complaining? If they're complaining, what's happening? What should we be doing, right? Here, at least in this country. And so that's what we're here to take a look at, is the findings from the EEOC. Now in your materials, I actually gave you at the very bottom, and so you know, you got to type this all in the right way. You could just go to the EEOC and search for the report. Quite frankly, just go to Google and look for the EEOC's Task Force on Harassment report. And you can actually get a summary report. The full report's like, 90-something pages, right? I know some of you actually may enjoy reading that, right? So actually, for those of you that really are responsible for this issue, it is worth reading because there's lots of great information in there actually. But they did issue a summary findings and a summary report. And if you open up in your handout at the very bottom of that middle page, you'll see where you can go to get all the key stuff that I'm talking about. And I would at a minimum take a look at the summary findings and these checklists that I'm going to step you through and highlight for you to really see what it is that the EEOC is expecting. Because they are looking for us as organizations and employers to approach harassment very differently than we have before. What power are they going to have down the road in the courts if we don't do some of these things that they suggest or recommend or require that we do? I don't know. I can't tell you that because there's some concerns, even just square issues with other federal agencies with some of the things that they're expecting, right? Some of us that are union employers, any of us union employers? Some of us are union employers. Some of the things that they're recommending that you do may not actually square with the union environment and how at least union employees see that they need to handle their business. So we're here to talk about the highlights for us and what it is that they are expecting. So two key things that they found, right? One, we took a look at the slide already, is that harassment is still pervasive. So all these years later, decades later, right? Anti-harassment policies, training, I've been a part of this world, right? Whatever we're doing is not working. If we're still seeing now, we've gotten better because several years ago there were just under 100,000 charges filed. So okay, so we've made progress now, we're at just over 90,000. So there are less in that sense. There is a bit of an ebb and flow of it all, but generally speaking, what they found is that not only is it pervasive, that what we are seeing has been reported is nowhere near what is actually really taking place out there. So it's rampant, and it's generally unreported. And here are some of the statistics that they found, right? Is that 90% of individuals bring no formal action whatsoever. 70% don't even talk to anybody. Supervisor, manager, even a coworker. Why might not they not talk about it or complain? What do you think? Shout it out. I mean, I've only got a short list of the reasons why someone might not bring this particular situation forward. And I actually think very painfully of a situation where I have a colleague of mine, an HR professional, who called me years ago. We did some work together within the organization, and she called and she said, Lisa, I need some help. So what's the situation? So we have a bully amongst us. That was the term she used, right? We weren't sure whether we thought there was a protected class attached, so harassment from an illegal perspective. She didn't think that was taking place, but a bully. Someone who was kind of targeting at least one individual within their department, and depending on what was going on, maybe more than one. So her and I tried to figure out what we were going to do to approach this particular situation. So we had scheduled, her and I were planned to schedule a meeting with one of the senior executives because of the sensitivity of the nature of the individual involved. She calls me back and she says, Lisa, thank you for talking to me. I'm sorry to take your time. She says, but we really were not going to be doing anything. She was in pain. And to me, these are those situations where, this is one of the reasons, quite frankly, folks, where I'm on the outside, because I don't know if I would have been able to not do anything in that particular situation. But she was a pick your battle type woman, and I already know some other great strides she had made within the organization that she was picking off. So she decided in this one, she says, you know what? She says, if I fight, she says, then I might not be here to do anything else. I understand that as well. And so why do I bring this up here? Is she left that individual in that particular situation. So whoever reported the first time, you think anybody's going to come forward after that? Right? And, she knew that people were talking about it. I mean, this was not a very good potential legal situation for this organization. So the best that she was able to do internally was to determine that it wasn't related or believed because of a protected class, and then try and hang her hat on that, because bullying or harassment without a protected class reason, as we know, is not yet illegal in this country. I think it's coming, but we're not there. Which, by the way, EEOC really took a look at this issue, right? And this is a big part of what their push is right now, is that they don't want us, so I'll kind of leak out for those of us that haven't really been following this, they don't want us to just focus on the legal. They don't want us doing harassment training, prevention training, just to keep ourselves out of trouble. By the way, hate and love this last statistic, right? I love it because I think you all are in the right place to figure out what can you do in your organization to jumpstart your initiative or take it to the next level if you've already got one. By the way, these statistics mirror the research that's coming out with workplace bullying, right? Individuals are not bringing situations forward. If and when they do, they are either being voluntarily or involuntarily, right, walked out of the organizations that they work for. Right, so here's what the EEOC says. Look, we should have every reason to take this seriously, at a minimum, the legal cost, right? So this shows you, I believe, just what they recovered in 2015. By the way, this is just what the EEOC recovered in 2015. Who knows who else gets to recover out there? Right? EEOC decides not to take a case, they kick it out, and an individual goes to an attorney, right? So, I mean, this is not even including all of the money that's awarded through settlement or litigation, right, with private counsel involved in situations. Of course, all of the psychological, physical, all of the harm to the individuals, right, their family members, and then back to the business specific case, right, so you got the legal, then you have all those practical reasons. The research has shown, right, when individuals are being harassed, when individuals are in hostile work environments, when they're being bullied, when they're being retaliated against, when they're being discriminated against, without us really realizing it. Now, those of us here, I saw lots of hands as HR professionals. We know this, right? We know this. We have trouble convincing our organizations of this because it's not always quantifiable, right? It's a soft thing sometimes, or lots of times it's people. But just like we can actually track turnover and show our organizations now the costs of turnover, I don't know if everybody knows how to do that, but that's a powerful tool to show our organizations when they're not willing to change something. But we now know that it affects in a big way productivity. I mean, that's the bottom line, right? Customer service, our reputation damages. Heck, you know, right now, I don't know if you all are paying attention, but, you know, there are, I'm trying to think, at least one of the news shows, there's lots of ads that they're pulling out from a couple of shows. Have you seen this? People are destroying Keurigs. I don't know if anybody's done that in here, but people are destroying their Keurig coffee makers right now because of something that took place by a news reporter, right? So the trickle effect, right? People are watching everything right now. And of course, as you know, social media makes information instantaneous for folks, right? So EEOC says we should have every reason to take this seriously. But here's their big shift, I think, huge shift. Because up until now, it's been avoid liability, right? Keep yourself out of trouble. Make sure your people know the legal ramifications, what the law says they can and can't, should or shouldn't do, and what the consequences are. But now, through all of their research, say, look, we know one thing now is true more than anything else, is that culture is the driver on whether harassment will flourish within your organization. Or let's see how they worded this the other way, or conversely, right, on whether you will be able to successfully prevent harassment. So let's continue on. So what does that mean? So number one, they say we need to take a look at leadership and accountability. And they see that as very poor at a minimum. So I'm not going to talk globally as to how our leaders run our organization, specifically to the issue of harassment and discrimination. They believe that we are not taking it seriously. And I will tell you, 20 plus years later, I've been asked to come in and do training many times where, well, in the early years, I will say many times, because as a business owner and kind of following on my mission and how I do things in life, I will no longer do this. But in the early years, and I still get the requests, I would do training where I didn't have any of the C-suite sitting in training. I had no idea what was going on. I will no longer do anti-harassment training. And again, sexual harassment to me is a piece of it. I might come back and do a specific focus on that. But to me, it should be anti-harassment training, right? Anti-discrimination, bullying training, the whole range of the different topics. I won't do that unless my C-suite is not just in a briefing. Because sometimes they try and have me do just a minimal briefing for them, just to know what's coming. Nope. I'll do a briefing so they know what's coming. And so that when people say, hey, why are we doing this? You can answer the question, right? Feeling 100% bought in and driving it, but then I want you sitting in training with everybody else. Either your own training, or ideally for me, I want employees, managers, leaders, all mixed about in the training. So everybody can see we're all learning, right? Most of us have no idea really how to handle these kinds of issues, right? We've not really been trained. So let's all learn together and make sure we understand rights and responsibilities. So they're really looking for us to take a focus on leadership. I'm going to talk more about that when we get into the checklist and accountability and the kinds of things that will show the EEOC that you've taken that seriously. So if you ever get a complaint, these are the kinds of things now for sure that they will be asking for, looking for. And they are saying, so around it, right, holistically, your systems and policies and procedures, right, how you look at your leadership in your organization, that needs to change. And then your specific training and how we all are approaching training, they're saying needs to change as well. If you're not doing it, you should be doing it. And depending on how you're doing it, you may want to take a look at a whole other way of approaching your training. Okay, so I already mentioned this. So this is really the key. What they're now saying is if you are doing anti-harassment training to avoid liability, you're approaching it all wrong to them. If it's just that's the only thing that you're doing, or if you've got anti-harassment training and it's kind of discrete over here, and you'll see a little bit more of this as we go, but if you have a diversity and inclusion approach within your organization and that's over here, and those two things don't blend and synergize and are not related, then you're, to them, missing the mark. All of these things need to be totally related. So what they now are looking for you to do is to have harassment prevention strategies and efforts, a holistic approach. It's not just about making sure people understand what the law says, that they know how to recite quid pro quo and what that means. It's now for them more about your culture and your organization and the behavior and the level of respect, right, that you tolerate, right, and drive within your organization. So that's kind of the key. So with that, and so this is the part where I say I don't know exactly how all this is going to play out, folks, because some of this pushes up against some of the other laws and the union environment, right? NLRB is changing. So we'll see how it affects some of the things that I'll talk about as we go throughout the session together. But they actually are now recommending, not requiring, recommending 2 things. So as a part of your anti-harassment training, you should include a component. Well, I say component. When you read it, it sounds like, you do civility training, you do bystander training, you do this. But I would say, folks, at least as a component. So right now when I do training for clients, I've built it in as a part of my couple of hours, or however long they give me, I will touch on these 2 things. The second one, if I can, right? So the first one is civility training. Talk a little bit more about that later. Just want to kind of wet your whistle, get you thinking. So one, they're recommending that we focus on civility, respect. That's really what they mean here. And the other piece is, and this is the part that I think are going to potentially, union employers might have some challenge with this one. I've already got some calls asking how do we think we should approach this, is this idea of bystander intervention. Is teaching your employees to be a collective force, is to not walk away when they see something happen, but to recognize the signs and to potentially intervene on behalf of another individual. Either that means stepping in or speaking up that they've seen something take place. So 20 years later, doing lots of investigations in the union environment, sometimes it's very difficult to get them to say anything, right? I find that typically, union, did I ask you union employers so I could see? I have some in here, few, okay, right? I will tell you though, like anything, I have done a few investigations where enough is enough. I have had some opportunities sitting in behind closed door where employees go, well, look, let me tell you, right? I can't take it anymore, right? I'm not going to necessarily admit this on the outside of here, right? But I got 10 employees telling me exactly the same thing, what I need to hear. That's enough. I don't need to, basically breach any one individual's confidentiality in that particular situation. So we'll talk more about these 2 things. I think they're both super important. At a minimum, I would absolutely be all over civility training as quickly as possible if you're not already doing something in that area. And I would definitely take a look at this idea of bystander intervention. At a minimum, a few of my union clients, they're not yet doing this with their employees, but what we've done is we've decided to talk about it with supervisors and managers, at least the idea of it. Because, supervisors and managers, we may have them in supervisor manager role, but unless they are really trained and prepped in this particular area, they walk by something taking place over there, what might they just do? Keep walking, right? Spent lots of times in telecommunications and call centers, and the mentality there, unless we teach them otherwise, is these are my employees in this pod. So if I see or hear something going on with this group of employees, you know what? Sorry, that's your responsibility. You're the supervisor for this group of 6 employees in this pod, right? So we have to help them understand that it's one team, right? That we all need to help with each other so you can get the process started there. So I'll tease you with that idea a little bit. So in June of 2016 is when the EEOC came out with the findings of this task force. So from 2015 through 2016 to about June is when they studied this. In February of 2017, the EEOC issued proposed guidance, updated proposed guidance on preventing harassment and discrimination in the workplace. It's not been finalized yet. I don't know what's taking so long, right? But right now, we can at least see what the proposed guidance is. And I will tell you, I would definitely take a look at the proposed guidance, right? Because there's lots of examples and lots of good detail in there on what we need to do and should be doing as organizations. So here are a few of the key highlights. Bless you. So first of all, one of the things that they've shared in this proposed guidance is that they are fully prepared to represent individuals who bring forward complaints not just for sexual harassment, right? But for harassment because of sex stereotyping, because of gender identity, because of sexual orientation, because of pregnancy, because of genetic information. I wanted to make sure I got that full list. I mean, right now, there's lots of pregnancy discrimination complaints, but whenever I go to the EEOC newsroom to see what kinds of things are taking place, you really don't see harassment cases out there, right? Even in the issues of gender identity and sexual orientation, they've had enough trouble making waves in the courts with discrimination claims. Now they come out saying, look, they are full, courage of conviction, right? They're absolutely going to be pursuing discrimination and harassment complaints of anything. This is really the way I see this. Any of the protected classes under their purview. That sexual harassment back in 1986, when the court found that harassment because of sex was illegal, they are now attaching that same line of thinking to each and every protected classes. They're going to go one step further. They said, look, we will also be actively looking to represent cases where somebody comes to us for perceived harassment, even if somebody got it wrong, right? Associational harassment or discrimination, you know, because I'm white and I associate with African Americans or with Asians, right? So they're going to start taking those cases and representing those zealously. Alleged harassment, and these ones, I really don't see third-party bystander cases. You know, typically we hear, you know, we always say any third party, unintended third party, can be on the receiving end of harassment and discrimination, but really don't see cases all that often, right? EEOC said we are absolutely going to start taking those cases, and we've already seen them more and more take cases dealing with off-site conduct, right? Not necessarily the things that happen in a bar, you know. I still talk about those things, yes, absolutely. Sometimes those are part and parcel of a particular case that I might be investigating or a part of. But right now, because of social media, right, because of technology, it's much easier for individuals to get caught up in, you know, cyber harassment and cyber bullying, and then for organizations to take steps to treat these situations as, you know, not just company policy violating, but violating the law as well. So here's why I recommend you take a look at the guidance, because these are the kinds of things that people ask me about. What is really severe or pervasive? How do we know when something actually crosses the line? One of the questions I'm asked all the time, or one of the comments is, oh, you know, that's just subjective and everything is subjective. That's not true. We have ways. When I conduct investigations, I absolutely have criteria and things that I'm looking at. I mean, you know, you got to weigh things, absolutely, right? But there are definite clear factors of determining objective versus subjective. And here's an interesting one as well, especially for those of us that may be new to this. And I bring this one up because there's a recent case out of, I want to say the 7th Circuit, but don't quote me on exactly the jurisdiction. What's more important was the finding. This case went to trial, went up to the appellate court for us to be more definitive on this. Case basically, a judge threw out a case at the trial court saying it wasn't harassment because it wasn't severe and pervasive, the picture that the plaintiff had painted. And the appellate court said, that's not what the law requires. Bless you. Law requires severe or pervasive. Okay? Right? So the more severe, less amount of times anything needs to take place before it crosses the line. Less severe any one incident, you know, could take 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years before one of these situations actually rises to that level. Right? Talks about how the EEOC looks at systemic harassment. This is a big one. Supervisor, coworker, what's the difference? Right? If you're in multi-state, really understanding not just how the state of Missouri looks at this particular issue, but different states look at who a supervisor is and coworker liability a little bit differently, right? So if you are in more than one state, please, super important to make sure you understand what each of the different jurisdictions, state jurisdictions, say on this particular issue. So here's what they came up with. So I'm going to quickly move through this. You can see behind me, because I'm going to then do what they did, which is really blend this into 4 key checklists for us to now approach our organizations. But they basically said, look, 5 key principles, folks. And I think I've listed at least the first 2 we've talked about, leadership and accountability, right? We need to make sure that you've got, and I've always talked about this one, right, a good anti-harassment policy, but they really take some of their what they're looking for further. They want to make sure that you've got a good reporting and complaint mechanism in place, and your investigation process, and then of course how they take a look at or how you approach your training. So I kind of highlighted here in there, number 5, regular, interactive, tailored training. That's very important to them these days. I've actually gone back in this year to a client who there's a new HR professional. New HR professional came in on the back of some training that the prior HR professional had delivered, and it was some really old tape of a blue-collar work environment. And her employees, when she came in, she started meeting the employees, and people were making fun of it. You know, they were laughing about it. Nobody took it seriously. If they don't take it seriously, you think they internalized anything? You know, you think they related to it in any way, right? So they want to make sure that our people can really relate to it. So they took these 5 core principles, and they basically said, look, we're going to give you 4 main checklists to work from. And if you apply and follow, at least make good faith efforts to use these 4 checklists to design or revise and update your anti-harassment approach, if there's ever an issue, right, hopefully they'll be able to look favorably on you because they will see that you've done everything that you can and you had an errant employee, right? Or a maverick leader who decided to do whatever they were going to do anyway. So here's how they break this down, right? So we're going to go in order. And I'm going to share the highlights with you. So you'll notice in the handout, I try and give you the key information, right? So under leadership and accountability, I only give you the risks here. I don't give you everything that's going to show up on this particular slide. But look, I will tell you, I tried to highlight everything for you here, but everything that's here is online where I gave you this link. And I would absolutely go print up. It's literally, they gave kind of checklists. So I would go to this link that I gave you and print out the checklists for yourself. You will not see everything that I have in there, but you will see what I have here and then some, right? A little more detail around each of these areas. I always think my job is to give you the highlights, right? So here's to them how you will take leadership and accountability seriously. I'm going to actually light all these up. I know some of them fade to the back, but I just want to put it all up there so we can kind of take a look at all of it together. I think each and every one of these ideas that you see up there are self-explanatory. Should be self-explanatory, right? Number one, you see, and this is just continuing to be a resounding message that they're sending. Culture, 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 right? Respect. Do you actually focus on respect, positive behaviors within your organization, not the let's do what we need to do to make sure that we don't have, right, any kind of a lawyer or federal agency knocking at our door. So what they're looking for you to do, and I gave you the risks there. I figured take a quick look at this right now. It's a good opportunity for you all to kind of hone yourself to at least see do you fall in any one of these categories. So through their research, they actually identified certain high-risk businesses or industries to harassment or discrimination, right? So you got homogeneous work environments, diverse work environments, environments where there's lots of alcohol involved, customer service, anybody here customer service, retail, right? Where a lot of your employees are customer facing, So I do a lot of work in hospitality, right? I have the good news is I have several clients. They want to make sure as soon as somebody walks in the door to their hotel, right, that nothing is put in question with how their employees treat each other and how their employees treat their customers. Do you have individuals that are isolated? Actually, I'm getting ready to conduct an investigation right now, and we're trying to figure out exactly how to approach the logistics of this, because we think that it's more than just one particular location. But when I say that, each location is just a group of 4 or 5 individuals that live together on in a trailer, if you will, for like a week straight. To firefighter, police, those kinds of businesses, where they're first responders, right? And so there's, each person has a certain expertise, and there's a couple of men, a couple of women living together in close quarters, and they're in these little pockets all over the country. And so we got a complaint. So there's one person on each of these crews that's kind of like the supervisor. But from what I understand right now, none of these people have been given any training on how to not just be a leader. I mean, think about how difficult it is to lead in a white collar or in an office environment. But now they need to lead in a situation where you've got people living together 24/7 for a week straight, right? And all sorts of things are popping up. So we're trying to figure out how do I get out there and investigate this, because their closest location is not even right here, where I can go find 2 or 3 in the kind of St. Louis market for me, so I don't have to travel, right, and add up the expense. But they know that if they don't do that, right, they don't want to be short-sighted in the expense to get somebody out there that can look into this situation and determine, is it an isolated incident in this one particular area, or is this something that is potentially taking place in their business across the boards, and people just have not come forward because of the existing culture with that particular work environment. So for sure, assess your risks. So one of the next things that I've always been a huge fan of, I don't always like how we go about doing them, but I do think if you've not done a climate survey, not necessarily an employee engagement survey, although great, an employee satisfaction survey. If it's an employee engagement survey, absolutely, though, one of the key things that we want to put in there is not just do you like working here. What the EEOC means by this is, do you believe this is a safe work environment? If so, or if not, please describe with detail. Have you ever been disrespected while working for us, either on-site or off-site? If so, please describe in detail, either on paper or complain to us, because we have a zero tolerance for that. Oops, excuse me, by the way, I'm going to take that back. So we're going to take a look at a slide, have a quick conversation of being very careful about language zero tolerance. EEOC is not liking that language anymore, right? So one key place to take a look at in your policies of potentially pulling some language out, which we've had forever, right, in our organizations. Make sure you allocate sufficient resources, time, money, individuals who are trained, right, whether it's a hotline, making sure, and part of what I mean by this in terms of sufficient resources, I know this is going to boggle some of your minds, but this is how organizations approach this. So you can't complain during working hours because everybody's billable. So you have to complain during off working hours. What do you think the EEOC would do with that one? Money, billable, more important, right? But let me go to the other side of the hand that I think is the big issue. If they're non-exempt employees, what's the other message that we also tell them? Don't work off the clock. So, I've had employees come after me over the side saying, well, what do I do? Because, I'm not supposed to come in and work. Are they going to pay me for this? It should be something I should be able to do during working hours. Ensure consistent discipline. Hopefully I don't need to explain this one, right? This has to do with this zero tolerance policy, right? So, or no zero tolerance policy anymore, right? Is making sure that we are consistent in what we apply discipline to and the nature and the extent of the discipline that we apply, right? So a part of what I mean by that is just because it's the CEO, the COO, or the rainmaker of the organization, right? If they did something that you would discipline someone over here for, to the point potentially of termination, that's maybe a receptionist. Believe me, they're looking for you to treat the rainmaker, even the CEO, potentially in that same way. If you don't have systems in place for this, policy, updated policy, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, complaint procedure, updated complaint procedure. I say that. I still sometimes when I'm coaching or doing an investigation, I'll look at an employee handbook or an anti-harassment policy, and I can tell just through some of the language in there that the policy is not completely updated, and I don't really know, and this part I don't know until I start asking the questions, but it always makes me start asking, there's 2 or 3 people named here as complaint monitors. Are those still the people? Oh no, so-and-so hasn't been with us in 4 years. How do the employees know exactly who to go to, right? If you're not updating it, they see you're not really caring, you're not paying attention to that particular policy. And this I mentioned earlier. Is anybody really focusing on diversity and inclusion efforts in your organization? You started doing that, right? Love the idea of taking a look at this. I know that a lot of big public organizations, really started doing this. I have one huge healthcare client, and they've been focused on diversity and inclusion, right? They're national, several 100,000 employees. So I know a lot of us have not gotten there yet, but I will tell you, even if you have 10 employees, 20 employees, right? You bring in 2 people, there's diversity, right? And we don't always just naturally understand each other. So the idea of diversity, it's not what these big organizations are doing, right? There's small things, little things that we can do to show our individuals that we care about the diversity. We want to leverage it, right? And we want to make sure everybody feels included. And so the key to this one is, if you do any of these efforts, make sure your harassment prevention is a part and parcel of it. That's not separate over here, that you've got a diversity group over here and HR and their initiatives over here. So this is something that I've always spoken about, anti-harassment policy. But now, by the way, I don't want to leave this behind quickly to see if anybody has, I haven't opened it up for Q&A. Anything in particular on Q&A? I think we're doing okay on time. Please. Okay. So the question is, I said proper discipline in these kinds of situations. What does proper discipline mean, right? And I think this also has to do with this idea of zero tolerance. Not everything is somebody being terminated. Not everything is somebody being disciplined. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons I'd love to go in and do training to prevent, before there's an issue, before there's a complaint, right, is so that we get to do certain things like this, for example. So one of the things that I teach my managers, look, the whole idea is just to start having a culture where people know they need to start being more thoughtful. They need to be more mindful. So the first time you hear something, especially you look around and it seems fairly innocuous, you're not there to necessarily write the individuals up. But I've had plenty of opportunities when I've been on site for clients as maybe an HR representative for them, where I'll walk by the lunchroom or someone's getting a cup of coffee. On a Monday morning, lots of times is when I kind of hear these kinds of things, I always plant myself in the little, coffee area, the lunchroom, just to get a vibe on the culture of what's okay, what's not okay, right? And, you walk by and you hear somebody tell a joke or make a comment that they heard at the comedy club or at the Funny Bone or on TV, or, they're talking about something right now that's going on politically that has to do with some of these sexual harassment complaints, and, it's not really appropriate. They may not realize it's inappropriate, or they realize it's inappropriate, right? And it's not the right place. We don't want our managers kind of, oh my God, well, I can't believe you said that. You're going to get written up. I'm going to go call HR. That's not really the way to do it. I like to have my managers trained to do the kinds of things I go, dude. By the way, I'm a dude kind of person. I don't know if you all can do that. Works for me and my temperament. But I'll go over to individuals, right? But I'll go over to the CEO. I'll go, dude, really? At work? I mean, really? Like, I don't know about you, but I don't want anybody coming after me. Like, I mean, something. Just like, that's probably not a really good work conversation these days, Like, and you don't even get the whole sentence out of your mouth. I mean, you really don't even get this whole sentence out of your mouth. Where people are like, oh, sorry, my bad. By the way, I'm going to write a book someday, right? 3 words, sorry, my bad. Those are my 3 favorite words now, because that's typically all it takes when you realize that you've offended somebody, to do that very, very quickly. But it's really just that kind of a thing, where, an innocent one situation, you let somebody know, I see it, I heard it, I know everybody seemed to laugh, but here, not okay. And even if I'm not their direct supervisor. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't go back to my office. Make a little note. I'll walk by the cafeteria today, hear my friend Annette Jackson make a comment to Kathy Vaughn, or is that right? Vaught, the necklace is covering, right? About this, went over to her and said, dude, really, at work? She said, sorry, my bad, we'll never do it again. The whole idea is for us to take steps to reasonably calculated to end the poor behavior. Right? So you believe that that's the case, that they're not going to do it again? Absolutely great. You did your job, right? Now you listen and make sure everybody else is kind of listening. Don't walk by it a second time. Now the second time you hear it, say, hello, you're with me. Right? And kind of don't be afraid to do that. 2 weeks ago we had a conversation, didn't write you up in that case, but you know what? Look, what happened? So is letting people know early on, especially if you've allowed certain things to take place. I always say, don't whack people for doing things that we have tolerated, right? Many years ago, one of the companies I worked for, they had this slogan that was on all over on these digital boards that said, what you permit, you promote. Always remember that, right? So I hate when egregious, absolutely. I'm not saying don't deal with it. But if you've allowed shop talk and some horseplay and some of those kinds of things, do your training, have your meeting, have your communication, and let them know, look, folks, I know that we've been maybe not handling this as much as we should, or we're going to start. I mean, you don't want to kind of maybe say we haven't been handling it the right way. But you know what? Things are changing. This is my message would be, look, things are changing. And I just did this with 800 coal miners in Illinois. Things are changing. We need to change with it, right? And so it's the education. So not everything is immediate termination. It's the nature of the situation, right? Not everything is discipline to the point of, suspension even. It's going to depend on the nature of the situation. So are you required to go back to the complaining party to kind of let them know what you did or the resolution? Should we be concerned about retaliation? So here's how investigations typically take place. I mean, the EEOC doesn't require certain things. They want you to handle they want you to investigate a situation, take steps reasonably calculated to end the harassment. So there's no, even when I conduct investigation, I was just talking with another in-house counsel when I was getting ready to write the report. Every report I write is a bit different because of the nature of the situation, whether it's internal, whether it's external, what stage are we at in this particular situation. So typically, we want to get back to the complaining party. You want to get back to the offending party. Not details, right, but we have conducted an investigation, right, and our findings are, bottom line, conclusive, inconclusive. We do believe it's sexual harassment. We believe they violated company policy, inappropriate conduct, and here's either depending on how companies do this, here's what steps that we have taken, or we have taken steps to make sure this no longer takes place, right? Your test is if you see it happen again, right? So not necessarily going to tell you exactly what we made this person do, but we're going to let you know that we expect that you will not have a problem with this individual. This is where I for sure want to go back to that individual to say, look, folks, you know, we don't always know if something stays the same, gets worse, or starts back up again, right? Because people don't always come forward thinking that, you know, well, why would I come forward if it started up, got worse for complaining the first time? But individuals have a responsibility legally to let us know if they feel they're being retaliated against on the back of an investigation. So I want to go back to a complaining party and the alleged offender to let them know, look, because we just did this, the whole idea of this is that it stops, never starts back up again if I find out or hear about any form of retaliation. Absolutely. We're going to take potentially further steps. We don't get back to the witnesses. No requirement or recommendation to get back to the witnesses. May have an extenuating circumstance situationally where you may want to at some point, but not required to. Does that work for you? All right, beautiful. All right, so let's keep moving here. So here's the key, and again, I'll highlight these all together so that you can take a look at them while I'm talking. First of all, we should have an anti-harassment policy. Let me approach it the way I've always thought about it, because you know, and these things then will fit in the middle of all of it. You should absolutely have an anti-harassment policy. I mean, you've got 2, 3, 4, 5 individuals in your organization. I don't know if you need to have a formal policy where you take the time, money, and energy. To me, your practice will be your policy, right? What takes place in your day-to-day, right? Have you talked about it at a meeting? Do your people know what they should or shouldn't do? Make sure you understand what a policy says and looks like, and then talk about that. By the way, though, would love for you to have an actual written policy for your individuals. If you have a policy, please make sure it's updated. To me, if it's older, I say if it's older than a year, it's old, outdated. If it's older than 6 months, you know, I would be continuously taking a look at what's going on right now with harassment discrimination. Things are moving so fast with the nuances in the law. And quite frankly, here's the other reason why right now I say for sure more frequently than annually. President Trump has now placed 2 people on the NLRB. Right? So now the NLRB, National Labor Relations Board, some of you may not follow all of this and understand all of this, so I'll quickly give you the idea. Right now it's been a very democratic board, and Obama changed a lot of things with the NLRB, very, very pro-employee. And so I've already kind of been following this, and so now Trump just placed the second person, or appointed, which was confirmed, second person to the NLRB, last name Emanuel, and now it's Republican. And so law firms all over the country are holding seminars already trying to predict what's going to happen, and they're anticipating some big shifts with union organizing campaigns, all sorts of things. One of the things that will affect us is this idea of confidentiality and conducting investigations, at-will employment, right, and what you can and can't do to deal with inappropriate behavior in the workplace. I think the NLRB is going to potentially swing us back further in another direction, right? So we want to take a look at that, and will affect our anti-harassment policy, because what your anti-harassment policy says on confidentiality, anything on technology these days, at-will language in your anti-harassment policy, EEOC and NLRB is all over that. Target, Walmart, some of these major organizations had policies that they thought were legal policies that attorneys work with them on, and the NLRB ripped them apart because they thought they were deterring in some of their language individuals from bringing forward complaints of harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. So you want to make sure they're updated. You want to make sure that please don't just pull them off of the software program or from a friend, right, from another company, right? Make sure they are ones that you create because you know your organization, and have legal counsel review it with you to make sure that it's legally compliant, right? And then from that, be careful to make sure that it's not in legal language, right? That it's really and easy to understand for all of your employees. You want to make sure that you've got several different places where where you disseminate that policy. Please don't just email it to your employees. So many companies have failed by you saying we emailed it to them. If you do not have a way to actually track that they received it, read it, and signed off on it, it's as if you didn't disseminate your policy at all. Even just posting it on your company intranet, unless you have a way to show that your employee got it, had access to it, had opportunity without coercion or duress, meaning to get a job or keep a job in a sense, right? They understood it and signed off on acknowledging what your policies and procedures are. Of course, kind of built into all of this, folks, is that you follow what's in writing in your policies and procedures. Trying to see if there's anything else in there. Here's one of the big ones. I kind of spun around this idea of confidentiality. Got to be really, really careful about this idea of confidentiality. Need to make sure that we are not guaranteeing our employees 100% confidentiality in any one of these situations. The other piece that I want to touch on with confidentiality, as of right now, and those of you in HR should hopefully know this, right? But as of right now, I can no longer, this has been just the past few years, and I think this is going to change again, but I can no longer, in an investigation at the beginning of my interview or at the end of my interview, tell people, excuse me, you cannot talk to anybody about this. I used to say, you know, I can't control who you spoke to before, you know, the investigation started, but now that we're in the investigation, I expect that you will either come back directly to me with anything that you need to share or to this individual, right? Retaliation is something that we're so concerned about. We want to make sure that it's not leaked out. You know, I had a whole thing that I would say to try and keep people from talking to each other. Now, according to the National Labor Relations Board, that is viewed as an unfair labor practice, or could be, because we're trying to deter employees from talking about a term or condition of employment with each other. That's the short story. That's the easiest way to break it down, right? They say if there's a specific reason that you can potentially justify in advance for expecting confidentiality, then you can. You think somebody's going to sabotage, there's violence, or somebody may do something, but you have actually had to independently determine that prior to conducting the investigation to know that you were going to need to do that. I've not been in any of those kinds of situations, right? So right now, people, I can't tell people, and you shouldn't tell people that they can't talk about it with each other, right? So I very carefully step around that particular issue. So when I do put anything about confidentiality in writing, it's just letting individuals know that if and when you come to us, and we encourage you to come to us, because our job is to investigate, we cannot guarantee 100% confidentiality. We'll do our best to provide only need-to-know information to those who only need to know. I think that's really the key there on anti-harassment policy. Let me touch on this, though. So EEOC has now basically come out to say that they don't like zero-tolerance language because they think that actually will deter individuals from bringing anything forward. It's kind of, I don't know if this maybe goes back to the question that was asked earlier, is, you know, and how about this, by the way? So this was years ago. But I remember getting a phone call from after training. I got a phone call from an individual who didn't like what just happened in their company. So they were calling on somebody else's behalf. They're like, Lisa, is this what you meant? They said, and did you see our policy? Now, I don't write your policies. I will typically, you know, do what I can to make sure employees know that they exist. So they had a line in the policy, and then they actually took action based on this. And the attorney, apparently, I found out after the fact, recommended that they bring them back very quickly. But the individual had made an inappropriate, protected class-based comment in a meeting. Once. HR terminated them because their company policy said they have a zero tolerance for even one inappropriate, race-based, protected class-based comment, speech, picture posting, whatnot. We will take swift and immediate action up to and including termination. And so they wanted to send a message. That's actually was exactly what I found out. So they wanted to send a message and let people know zero tolerance, right? What do you think, by the way, as soon as they terminated that individual, by the way, I got a phone call. But when I went in and started kind of talking to them, what do you think the rest of the workforce was thinking and feeling and out loud talking about? Right. Oh, absolutely. And by the way, I started hearing some things because this is a company I had worked with in other capacity, and some of the people knew me. They're like, Lisa, that's not at all even the worst, you know? And they know that there's other stuff that's kind of taken place. And then it became, I mean, I don't even know what to say anymore. Like, I'm afraid to say anything anymore. Like, how do you even know exactly what is going to say if you can't even be human and they're like, I didn't mean anything by it. They didn't really there was no investigation that was conducted in this situation. They're like, don't you think that's taking all of this a little bit too far? I always hate editorializing, right? But I do. I absolutely think, you know, company policies or school policies, you can't hug each other or anymore. You know, if my kid falls off the jungle gym and he or she is crying, and go hug them. I want them to tell you, leave me alone, right? But if my young child needs a hug, but companies have policies. You can't say you look nice anymore. You can't say, right, you can't hug each other anymore. Do I understand why we go to those places? Yes. But I don't think that's getting to the underlying issue of truly respect, right? So my recommendation and legal counsel's recommendation right? Because the individual that they terminated, by the way, also was in, although each and every one of us is in a protected class, but the individual was in a protected class. So attorney said, you know what, I don't think we should actually be making a case. I don't think you handled it up until now the right way yourself, right? So you need to actually now revisit with your whole organization what's okay, what's not okay. And we think one comment, that's not real, right? Nobody thought it was a severe comment. It wasn't the N-word, which we now have determined by court law across the country that you use the N-word once, actually, right, directed at somebody. Someone could actually believe that is a hostile work environment that they're working in. But short of that, right, we need to really take a look at what is the nature of taking place, how long, who's involved, all of that to determine how we're going to handle a situation. So they don't want us focused on zero tolerance. They want you focused on disciplined, proportionate to whatever it is you determine took place, and consistent with other people that have been determined to have done the same thing in the same way in the same number of times, if you will. Everybody with me so far? Okay, good. Check my time here. Okay, so workplace reporting system, I mentioned a few of these things already, right? So you should have a complaint system built in. A couple of key things here. You want more than one complaint handler. Please don't have your employees. I used to have them go to anybody that they're most comfortable with, any member of management. I narrow that these days, absolutely. I would designate formal complaint handlers. You want to make sure your managers know an employee goes to them, right, and they don't go to the formal complaint handler. That does not mean you do not investigate, because you are now in the know, right? But you can kind of try and redirect the situation and, you know, push them back to following that process, right, to follow that more formal centralized process, absolutely, right? But I would have more than one complaint handler. I would have a diverse complaint handlers. You know, look at your population. Do you need a man and a woman? Do you need people in 2 different business units? Do you need diversity in other ways other than just men and women, right? Do you want more than one avenue for them to potentially reach out to people? Phone number, email, texting, I don't know, whatever your audience, a hotline, if you have that as well. Here's the other key one. I don't know what hours you all keep, but one of the things that I've seen organizations take a hit for is if you do not give people a way to reach you when you are not working as HR professionals. Right? There's been a couple of university situations where on a Saturday night, Friday night, something took place, but nobody had anybody to complain to or to hear them because HR didn't show up until Monday morning. Quickest way to lose a case, right? And those were, at least in 1 or 2 of those cases, those were situations where it was fairly egregious, where the individuals were supposed to now be working together on another night, and there was nobody there to help them. So do you go to work and tolerate it, or do you not go to work, potentially get fired because you're not showing up to work because nobody realizes that there's a complaint filed, right? So somebody in the organization to receive those complaints. The second, let's see, the third to last bullet point to me is so interesting that they have to come out and tell us. Assume innocence before guilt, you know? And I think this message is sent, of course, for the inexperienced, right? The supervisors, managers that may be doing especially that initial complaint intake, right? It's just because they're your friend, just because you've worked with them for a long time, just because you think you know them, right? You have to separate and wear the right hat and the right role in this particular situation. So, of course, they need to know to take complaints seriously, even if it's from the chronic complainer or the person that everybody has issues with, right? You hear anything having to do with what it is that we're talking about, our people need to be trained to know that they're taking in a complaint and to take that complaint very seriously. I will share this one last piece. This part has always been the case, right, where it says operate promptly, thoroughly, and impartially, right? So we are expected to be in the investigation of a complaint within 24 to 48 hours of receiving a complaint. Doesn't mean you need to complete it within 24 to 48 hours. It took me a month to complete an investigation about a year ago, almost the whole month in December. I had the CEO involved and a whole bunch of board members and senior. It took us a long time to kind of get all the pieces put together. Just did one. It took me 1 day. I had a complaining party. I had an alleged offending party. I had a couple of emails and in-house legal counsel, right, to conduct the investigation, right? But they want to see that you move on this swiftly, you know, and I look at that as an investigator, right? How quickly do you come to me on the outside? You know, I had one situation where it took them 9 months to come to me and get anybody involved in an investigation. So by the time they got to me, the complaining party was fully heated. I had a 7-hour interview with the complaining party. Usually I can get it in like an hour and a half to 3 is my time frame to exhaust typically whatever I need from a particular individual. So the longer we leave them sitting out there without handling it effectively, either internally or externally, right, that's when they start getting emotionally heated. People get emotionally heated, almost doesn't matter what we do at certain stages, right? They're going to be finding all the negative and, right, kind of going kicking and screaming, if you will. So here's the other piece of this. Make sure that whoever will be doing your complaint handling, meaning not just intake. We want to make sure anybody that's doing intake is trained, but you want to also make sure that whoever is going to be doing your investigating, if you will be doing it in-house, the key here is making sure that they are trained as investigators. And I've had one or two people over time tell me that they are good interviewers because they do really good interviews for hiring. Has anybody done both interviews for investigative and for interviewing for hiring? Two very different interviews, are they not? Completely different interviews, right? So we want to make sure that somebody knows how to do an interview for investigative purposes. They need to know the specific issues that they're going to be investigating then, right? Harassment, discrimination, what the law says, right? What your company policy says, right? That they're ideally impartial within that organization, whether they're internal or external. And quite frankly, if you bring anybody in from the outside, absolutely these are the kinds of things that you want to make sure that your outside investigator has going for them as well, right? Ideally that they have the experience in conducting investigations, that they are not kind of biased by anybody, right? So if an HR professional has to conduct an investigation of the CEO, here's the other thing. You may be impartial, but what do you think employees may think about situations that involve the C-suite and you all investigating internally? Right? And as a matter of fact, I had a woman tell me very recently in an interview, she said, and they brought in, there's a situation with somebody within the HR community that she's complaining about. They brought in somebody from a completely different business unit of HR. They don't make decisions together. They don't know what's going on. And this individual basically has said, you know what? Nope, you're still HR. So what was great about this organization, and I got to actually even kind of note this, is that as soon as that complaint came in, guess what? That's when I started investigating, right? They said, absolutely, we don't even want to give the appearance that we are, right, biased. And so if you think that we are going in, we're going to take that off the table, right? We're going to bring in somebody from the outside. Somebody that knows how to document, somebody that understands the importance of confidentiality. In investigations, people ask me, this woman that I met with recently, I didn't even sit down more than, we were there for 5 minutes. She had rattled 5 questions, trying to find out what was already going on, what did I know, what did they tell me, who this, what that. I had to know what I can and can't or shouldn't share on behalf of the organization, right? So we've talked about this idea already, right? Making sure that you already have discipline that you're prepared for, that if it's this, that, or the other thing, it'll be this form of discipline. If it's this, that, or the other thing, it'll be this form of discipline. So your employees also know what to expect, and they can plan for this in situations as well. So again, of course, this is what I do, for a living. So this is why I was happy that the EEOC had gotten here as well, because I've always believed that this kind of training should be face-to-face. I've never been a kind of technology person for interpersonal people-related training, right? I've always thought face-to-face, especially at the introduction of these issues with folks. We can always come back and reinforce, right? So I have lots of clients that I think are doing it right, where they'll do face-to-face year 1, maybe year 2, sink it in, right? So people understand respectful communication and interaction and harassment-free work environment. And then year 3, year 2, year 3, they do something online, right? Whether a webinar or some kind of online training, and then they come back again and they do face-to-face. Depending on the turnover in your organization is whether how frequently you do something face-to-face. But the EEOC, they didn't really say this before. They always would just say qualified training, right? But now they've actually come out, so this is not my list. These the EEOC's list of your compliance training, that you should be doing compliance training. And when you have that training, right, you make sure it goes to all levels within the organization, right? Please don't leave anybody out. So, you may not be able to get face-to-face with people that are remote. So I have some clients where, I'll get pockets of people. I've got 150 people here, so we could do it here. And then I've got 7 people in this office and 6 people in this office. Absolutely, do a webinar for those folks, right? And I think EEOC will absolutely explain not sending someone to travel and pay for their expenses to train 6 people for an hour and a half, 2 hours, right, on this particular topic. But when you go to those particular off-site locations, you do that particular training yourself potentially, right? So qualified trainers, comprehensive, that's my key here, folks. I just got love this one. I just got an email from a law firm who I did some coaching with an individual that got themselves into trouble. So I got an email from the law firm saying, hey, in light of what's going on in society right now, and this is kind of the email, right? And we talked about this when you were here coaching all those many, many months ago at the beginning of the year, but we think we should revisit our sexual harassment prevention training as a firm. So I've already reached out to the individual and said, super excited about that. Hope we're going to do more than just, and I know them, so I push early on. Hope we're going to do more than just sexual harassment training, because that's not really just the only issue out there, right? And so we're trying to schedule a time to talk to figure out how to approach doing that face-to-face training. But the good news is even the law firms, they're sometimes behind. You think they'd be ahead of these things, right? Sometimes behind in what they're doing. You see it says interactive, right? Not just a talking head. It's not just about making sure they know the law. This is, again, why I love this. This, to me, has always been about respect. It's always been about understanding, appreciation. Lack of understanding, right? Then lack of respect. So they want to make sure that it's interactive, that you get your people talking. One of my best and favorite sessions that I did with the client end of last year, and I've tried to do a couple of these whenever a client lets me do it, is what I call the 180-degree swing on harassment, is what's potentially illegal, what's currently legal, but may be illegal, and what's perceived, right? What kinds of things to you here are potentially are just inappropriate, for you that you don't want to tolerate in this particular work environment. And I kind of just approached the thought from left to right, and then we got everybody into small groups, and they talk to each other, right? Is here in this organization, what's our culture? What kinds of things do we think should always, never, ever take place? What kinds of conversations or speech or behaviors or anything and they talk to each other, right? And we brought everybody together and we collected lists, and the organization, the leaders sent some things around and said, yeah, folks, absolutely, I'm totally behind this. Hey, can you explain that? This is the dialogue that's been going on within this organization that I had a part of, right? People came out shaking hands with me. That was great. That was fun, right? How often do they come out of any of that kind of training saying that was fun? But they had an opportunity to really get to know each other on what was going to be tolerated within their organization, right? So at a minimum, folks, this is why whenever you say you have maybe just an hour to give me to do training, I always say there's never enough time for training. Why is that? Because these are the things at a minimum that the EEOC believes should be in your compliance training. Oop, I don't want to go too far. So at a minimum, these are the kinds of things that you should have in your training. These are the kinds of things that should be spelled out in your anti-harassment policy as well, right? And then highlighted in your anti-harassment training. One of the things that I like to do is make sure that you've got a very updated policy going into training. So sometimes I'll help with that or help bring legal counsel in to help you with that. And then I'll save, depending on how much time you give me, save 5 minutes, 10 minutes at the end of training and have everybody read or reread the policy, give them an opportunity to sign off on it while it's fresh from training, right? Gives one last opportunity to see if they have any questions or concerns about the policy. But again, some of the key things that should be in there. And then, I wouldn't just stop, by the way, with basic training for your supervisors and managers, and the EEOC doesn't think you should stop there either, right? So I always like to get everybody in a basic session, right? CEO to receptionist, right, in an organization. But then I also try and get managers, supervisors, anybody that's going to affect or can affect the terms or conditions of employment of another that might get a complaint intake. I always like to have additional time with them to make sure they know how to take in a complaint. What's their role? What's their responsibility? Is taking in a complaint the same thing as investigating? Do we want you to investigate? Right? What kinds of things should you be handling? Do we want you to document? How do we want you to document? How quickly do we want you to come to us? Who should you go to? And then this idea now that I've been now incorporating in is, well, respect with them, which I've always talked about, is, they're the example, lead by example. But the other piece now that I'm building in with supervisors, managers, is that this idea of kind of bystander, is that you all, this other way of leading by example, is that each and every leader and supervisor of the organization is a team. So even if you see or hear about something happening somewhere else, if you are in the place to be able to handle it right then and there, handle it right then and there if it's something that should be handled right then and there. So these are the kinds of things that I would absolutely talk to them about. Make sure they understand retaliation, because I'm sure many of you have seen articles, lots of articles floating around these days about unconscious bias and how that plays out, right? So when do we see retaliation? So often I conduct investigations, and the first thing that I hear, and I often believe it, genuinely, we didn't mean to harass. I didn't mean to make them feel uncomfortable. I didn't even realize that I was alienating them. I didn't see it. I didn't realize it, right? So helping managers and supervisors really understand how to not even unintentionally, unwittingly come across as retaliating against an individual who complained or was a witness or was the alleged offending party in a process around harassment and discrimination. So I want to quickly wet your whistle. So I'm going to step through a very quick idea so that I want to make sure there's some time also for some Q&A. But, you know, EEOC talks about this idea of civility training, and in their research they have determined that disrespect is an antecedent of that word, right, to harassment in an organization. And this is why they're saying don't just approach your training from making sure they know what the law says they can and can't do. Make sure they know underlying respect, appropriate behavior and speech, inappropriate speech and behavior for us here in this particular culture. Because what's okay for this side of the room may be different, actually, than what's okay for this side of the room. We want to make sure we don't tolerate things that are illegal, for sure. But, you know, my temperament is such, you know, I went to work all these years ago in the restaurant business growing up because I wanted a fun environment where people kind of just were carefree, right? And as I say that now, I sit in restaurants sometimes and I see people, you know, you ever been in a restaurant, you see all the wait staff, they're in this row and they're doing like the shoulder massage thing. I used to be involved in those kinds of things when I was 20. You know, now I look at them like, oh. And sometimes you see the manager or supervisor who go, oh, let me in, you know? And they're jumping into the mix as well. And they're not realizing really what it is that they're doing. They're just being themselves and not wearing the right hat. So some quick statistics for you, right? Again, here's why the EEOC is really focusing on civility. In their research, 96% said they experienced incivility at work. Look at this one. Treated uncivilly at work at least once a week. 48%, at least once a week, right? Crazy, crazy statistics. Now, this is why this is such an important issue for all of us to be taking seriously. What do you think the number is here? I heard a 60. I heard 100. Did I hear 100? I heard 100, right? Look at the statistic, 94%, right? So if we don't address it ourselves, the longer we let it sit there, I would say, dare I say, the worse it is, employees will start taking it into their own hands, right? So the idea is to focus on civility training, positive. So the key is positive behavior, right? Positive attitudes. What does that look like within each organization, right? For sure, discuss inappropriate, but make sure it's more about what we expect our employees to be like, right? Our culture, right? For people to take initiative, to have a positive attitude, to be respectful. But here's the thing. What I now know, and I think most of us know, respect means something different to different people. Would you buy that? Right? Has anybody ever taken a personality assessment? So one of the tools that I'm recommending, I'm going to quickly show you the one that I work with because it's not just a personality assessment, it's temperament, it's people's motivations, why they do what they do. When I conduct investigations, I absolutely care about what did she do, what did he say, where did it take place. But the main thing I really want to know is why are you filing a formal complaint and the 3 other people that were in the same meeting as you thought it was hilarious? And they can't even believe that you're filing a complaint against so-and-so. How did you not know that they didn't even mean anything by it? These are the kinds of things I look into all the time. And so when we do, so here's their recommendation for civility training. Do interpersonal communications and just leadership communications, conflict resolution. That's all great. I've done that for years. Love Dale Carnegie, still teach Dale Carnegie, masters of communication training, interpersonal, human relations, building self-confidence, leadership. Absolutely. But even Dale Carnegie right now, for years, has known the importance of tailoring that message. We all communicate in general, being a good listener, but we all listen in different ways for different things because of our temperament, right? Because of who we are. So my recommendation is when you do civility training or incorporate that piece in, tailor it. Help everybody understand how individuals see things that might be different than how you see things, right? To any of your general messages. So one of the tools that I work with, and I want to give everybody, and I spoke to work with Connell Insurance, we want to give everybody an opportunity to try this out. So on the very back of the handout is a QR code. So I'd love for each of you, right, totally up to you to do so. You can either come over and give me your card and I'll know to just do this for you, or if you're interested after this, run that QR code. It will give you an opportunity to take an assessment, the particular one that we're talking about, see what you think about it, and then see if there's a few people in your organization that you'd like to test it out with as well, to see if this is the kind of thing that you'd like to bring into your organization as a part of your training. Whether it's this tool, folks, or any other tool, if you're not getting to the level of each individual and helping each individual understand how respect means different things to different people, you're going to, I think, fly too high above the issue. Here's what I mean by that, right? So does this ever happen to you? This is why I do what I do, by the way. This is why we're here together. This happens constantly. How many times have these thoughts crossed your mind and you're only in training? Phone calls that you might have had, emails that you might have read, right? This last one's one of my favorite ones. Anybody ever think this? Right? You're sitting in a meeting, you're on your way into the office, you're trying to get to work, and you get somebody like me going, hey, how you doing? How was your weekend? Did you have a good time? What'd you do? Did you go anywhere fun? Oh, I was great weather. I saw my... You're like, really? Oh my gosh, leave me alone. Why did I come in the other door? Right? Or you're sitting in a meeting, a big presentation, and this happens more than I think we care to admit. You have a senior leader who has learned that in order to start off a presentation, you should start off with what? A joke. And the jokes are not always really the most appropriate. Now, for that individual and individuals like them in the middle of the meeting, that joke actually was hilarious. May have nothing to do with the purpose of the meeting, but the joke was funny. And you get somebody else in the meeting who's sitting there without you even realizing it, looking at the company policy. I know on page 7, line 3, says we are not allowed to make any comments like that, and I don't do it here. I would like to say it at work as well, but I know that we're not supposed to do that here. Is anybody relating to any of this? Right? So here's the quick idea about this, right? We can't respect people we don't value. We can't value them if we don't know them. And it's not like that show, you know, with The Office, if you remember, people walked around with these little kind of neon signs. We don't flash what it means to respect me, where my dance space is and where yours is. So the idea is that there's actually 4 different people, in a sense, that's on our team, right? We all come to the table with different ideas on what's okay and what's not okay. Here's the way I'll translate this for these purposes for anti-harassment today. I'm not talking about just straight interpersonal communication and having a good teamwork. I'm talking about preventing harassment and discrimination. There's 4 different individuals. Research shows hardwiring. We've got 4 different facets or aspects to each of us. And we have all 4 of these. We associate temperament with colors. We have all 4 of these core values within each of us. But within each of us, they're different order and different intensity level. So some of us are those people that are all about freedom and fun. Right? Let's stop having meetings to have a meeting. Let's just be about it, right? I'm going to say what I'm going to say. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I'm not trying to offend you. We just got to get results. We just got to say it's got to be said. Anybody like that in here? Right? Where to me, I come to work, I want to have fun at work. And, you know, my personal life fun and in the work life sometimes are one and the same. So for me, I've had to learn I can't really say everything that I want to say when I'm at work. Right? I'm a New Yorker. 4-letter words used to fly out of my mouth pretty regularly growing up. But now I realize in the workplace, and I'm good with that, by the way, you know, but in the workplace, I now know I have to control that because not everybody is okay with that. Then I have other people who, they're all about relationships, right? If somebody else cries, they cry, right? They're all about collaboration. They want to make sure everybody's being kind, right? Absolutely, we need to get down to business, but we want to make sure people are feeling okay with whatever it is that we're doing and how it impacts them. Do I have anybody out here? The huggers of the world? The way I kind of always classify you, right? So think about a situation where you get a person who comes into a meeting saying whatever they want to say, trying to actually just have fun. And whenever I interview people that got themselves into trouble that are of the orange category, that is the first thing that they typically will say out of their mouth. I was just trying to bring levity to the situation, just trying to lighten the mood. I wasn't trying to offend anybody. I was just trying to add humor in, just trying to have some fun. And I'll get a blue individual, very relationship-oriented person who'll go, but, you know, I was okay with it, but boy, I can't believe that it made everybody else upset. Right? So they're not necessarily going to complain on their behalf. They're going to complain on somebody else. Then you get somebody who's all about responsibility. These are the kinds of things I investigate all the time. Hate to say this, but I get an individual who's all about the gold. I see her standing over there. Thank you, by the way. I get an individual who's all gold, responsibility. Policy says this. I get to work when I'm supposed to. I take a break when I'm supposed to. I say what I'm supposed to and not what I'm not supposed to. Anybody here like that? Right? And that's really super important. Right? So think about these individuals, right, working alongside each other in the workplace, right? So, and a green individual is all about why are people even, why are people saying what they're saying and even having a problem with it? That doesn't even matter. Why are people even focused on it anyway? We should just be focused on the end goal. Why is there so much drama? Why? Just get to work. I have several of you in here as well, right? So think about the four of us, in a sense, having to work together, you know, and your employees not necessarily knowing how to navigate this. So on my team, anytime we have a new team member, we do this with our team members to let folks, we don't give anybody a pass. But people come in knowing that some people might say things unintentionally, they don't want to hurt your feelings. So in my team meetings, I'll have somebody now knows that I have one woman who every now and then she'll raise her hand and say, a little too much. So we dial it back, right? Employees feel comfortable in speaking up in each of these situations. So I'm just going to quickly kind of move through this so you can see the idea, right? So I bring this here because to me, we can't do respect training in the workplace, civility training in the workplace, without helping our employees understand what respect means. Because respect does not mean the same thing to everybody. And what I find is I have company values posted all over workplaces. One of the 6 values, one of the 5 values, one of the 10 values that I invariably will see will be what? Be respectful. I will tell you, and I think you all know this, right? Respect to one person is very different to what's okay to say, when to say it, where to say it, with whom. But we don't know that innately about each other. We know what's natural to us and what's okay for us, and we judge others and what's okay, not okay, by what's okay to us individually, not the whole, right? The culture of the organization should determine, you all should determine in advance and then day by day what's going to be tolerated and what's not going to be tolerated. So basically this quote is just to set this last idea up, folks. So the EEOC is also recommending bystander intervention training, right? So the objectives are this. So it's taken out of the educational environment. Let me make sure I get all the way through without leaving this slide. So it came from the educational environment, something that actually was put in place during the Obama administration. Lots of research into sexual assault and violence on school campuses. So there's a campaign that's been started in the schools, and I will go to what it's called here. It's called It's On Us if you want to do some research about it. So the EEOC is recommending that we take on a very similar campaign or approach within our organizations as the It's Just Us campaign. Short story, what this is teaching your employees, kind of like this gentleman did a great job. I would love to have him come to the schools and show these some of those pictures to the kids of what happens when people do drugs, right? But so just like that gentleman was talking about, it's the signs. So it's making sure individuals know the signs of harassment and bullying behavior, and then that they understand and believe that it's not just, you know, an us against them mentality in your organization, that you have a collective, a belief in the collective responsibility of the organization, and then empower them with education to intervene if they believe it's necessary. And then they teach you or show you several different ways in which to intervene. And intervene doesn't mean actively saying, hey, leave her alone. It could be. Intervene, and there's 4 different steps, and there's different words that they use for people to remember, and so that's what I've been incorporating into training, is different things, whether you step in, whether you draw them out, whether you go to a higher source. There's several different ways for people to know and think about what's needed in this particular situation, right? So we don't just leave it to the supervisors, managers, or HR who's in an office who we don't often know what's going on unless people let us know what's going on. So starting to get your employees more and more involved in this particular effort. I don't think I missed anything. This was my last slide, which we already mentioned, is that NLRB and NLRA could change a few things for us and what our expectations are from mainly at this point from a confidentiality perspective. Ooh. Questions, comments, please. So the question is, an individual's been in repeatedly complaining about perceived inappropriate behavior. And so at what point is enough in a sense? So without knowing what you've done to date, you know, so can you show that each time, and I'd say, you know, 2-3 times to me, enough is enough, But would you be able to show me on the outside? So this is your question to yourself. If somebody from the outside came looking in at what you've done, would you be able to show them that you did an impartial, objective, thorough investigation into the situation? Talk to whoever you could talk to, relevant people, not just I told her about it. You've got whatever documentation you need to pull, and you've done what you consider to be an objective, impartial investigation. To me, if they come back to me a second time, I'm going to ask, is there any new facts? I mean, before I even investigate the second time, say, is there anything new, or are you just not happy with my first answer? And I don't say it quite that way. That's my natural temperament coming out just now, right? In an investigation, or potential investigation, I'm going to approach that a little bit differently. But to me, if I can show that I did an investigation, I just did this outside investigation, and we were fully prepared for this woman to call me to add facts to the table. But they were anticipating that, so the traditional situation is I give a written report back to the employer, and then I never know what happens from there. But they had some foresight in this situation, so I actually wrote a letter, an abridged letter to the complaining party from me in a sealed envelope that they handed over to this woman at work, so that the organization thought it was important to dispel this once and for all, right? So sometimes it's one, validating on the inside that you're good with what you did and that you're willing to kind of hang your hat on that. Or I did have this situation a couple of years ago where a woman said, this person won't let it lie. Will you come in and investigate? I know what we see, but we don't want to leave this up to chance. So will you come in and do an validating, what they called it, a validating investigation. And so I didn't even send a written report. I just called and I said, here's what I see. They said, that's what we see. So we may need you to write one at the end of the day, but at least we can say that an investigator saw what we saw. If anybody would like any more information, any way I can help you out, I gave you my contact info there. Would love for you to try out the assessment again, the QR code, or let me know as well. There's business cards as well if anybody would like to reach out to me. Thank you so much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Lisa.